2018. Tonight's webinar is intended for new parents, for people that are new to Evoke therapy programs. However, like a lot of the stuff that I share, I think there's lessons from this that apply no matter where you are on the journey. So I'm going to talk about the idea of Willness therapy, the idea of Evoke therapy programs to introduce new folks. So if you're watching this recorded or live and you're new, this is your idea about the kind of big picture about what we think about Willness therapy. And if you're more experienced, this also gives you an idea to understand the theory behind what we do. I'll say one other thing besides that. This is one of those broadcasts that I would suggest that you share with friends and family if you have people that have questions about it. Because although Willness therapy is still new and unique to a lot of people today, it really does make sense, right? Especially with all the electronics and all the screen time and the problem that we have with our kids with nutrition. When you think about doing therapy outdoors, it makes the most sense. It makes common sense almost. So with that, let's talk about the idea of wilderness. First of all, the use of wilderness and the experiential living, we have access to metaphors. And the reason that that's important is because when you have somebody that's resistant to therapy, and even a motivated adult who comes to therapy has resistance. Everybody has resistance. If we didn't have resistance, there wouldn't be a need for therapy. So the use of metaphors helps to bypass resistance. So think about it. If you're talking to somebody about using baseball as a metaphor for life, it's hard to argue with the principles that you're sharing around baseball. And whatever level of openness there is, those metaphors, those stories, those fables, those parables can start to sink in over time. So the use of the daily living and the metaphors of daily living become powerful. And in the culture, an important part of it is the positive peer milieu. Most of us will acknowledge, if not in our own lives right now, but at least when we are younger and younger children, that they're more apt to listen to their peers than they are to authority figures. And so much of what happens that's positive out there comes from peers. People ask often, what if my child is able to pull one over on me? What if my child is able to fake looking good? And my response is, first of all, it's a pretty raw experience. It's a pretty provocative experience. And so oftentimes they're kind of exposed through the process. But secondly, they have their peers present to observe them. So when the staff might not be watching, when the staff might not have might not have the attention to pay attention to one specific conversation, peers are, and over time they're going to give that feedback. They're going to provide that observation. There's so much that happens from efficacy, right? Doing something hard, doing something where you accomplish something, producing something, getting through something tough. And the self-esteem that comes from that. I don't know about you, but for me, it's a challenge in today's world to provide opportunities for developing this efficacy for teenagers and young adults, because so much is so easy. And in fact, sometimes the lessons that we set up for them, the circumstances that we set up for them to try to teach them this idea that what they do makes a difference, that their efforts make a difference. Sometimes it feels very contrived. But in wilderness, because you're a small group, primitive living, nomadic, you have the opportunity to practice difficult things. I still have clients and students that refer back to many years ago about a specific hike or a specific storm, a specific time frame that they went through in wilderness, and that being a turning point for them. So going through something difficult, being able to make a difference in terms of your capacity to tolerate frustration, to delay gratification, can be a huge contribution to self-esteem. Early in my career, I thought that was all that we did around self-esteem, but now I know that there's a lot around connection too, and resonance. Accomplishing something difficult, similar to that idea of efficacy, that what I do makes a difference. In the early research, back 15 or 20 years ago, one of the things that we focused on a lot was this idea of internal locus of control, that external locus of control says that what happens to me determines my happiness. Internal locus of control says that what I do determines my happiness. And so these elements of efficacy and accomplishment shift that external to internal through the process of wilderness therapy. Developing an identity, who I am. Part of that is the removal from the family, right? The distance creates an opportunity to reflect. You're not going back and forth in real time like a pinball machine. You're actually learning to sit with yourself, to find your center, to find what you want to communicate. I think in the early days of wilderness therapy, in my early days of wilderness therapy, most of the mail, most of the letters was transported via snail mail. And then we got into faxes and emails later on. And that was even, in some ways, a more profound time for reflection, because you would have to write a letter before you got a letter back, both as a parent or a child. And in doing that, you start to try to discover your core, because you're not reading the audience, you're not trying to manipulate, because you don't have any cues coming back to you immediately. You start having to find your center and speak from that place. The group becomes a microcosm of life and of the family. That is why I think wilderness therapy is so effective in terms of assessment and treatment, because it's like taking your car into the mechanic and it's not producing the problem or the sound that it was producing that led to you taking your car in. When we take a student or a client into our program, they show up essentially eventually, right? Their strengths, their deficits, their challenges, their skills all show up, because the small group replicates the family at home, and they tend to replicate a specific role and have specific relationships that become problems for them or resources for them. And so you just start to see in real time what's going on. You don't have to rely on a lot of self-report. You just look at what's happening. The removal from distractions or defenses. You know, I've said this and I've alluded to it already tonight. 20 plus years ago, 23 years ago, when I started in wilderness therapy, there was absolutely a benefit to being outdoors, to being unplugged, even though it's nowhere near the level of connectivity we have today. But just that idea of being pulled out of all the immediate gratification, all the screen time, all the electronics, I think a lot of us can relate to that. I talk to parents a lot of the time when they go out of cell phone range. And my first inclination is to say, oh, that must be tough. And then while there's some challenges to that, so many people will report that that's a fantastic part of the vacation or the trip or the journey, being unplugged. And it tends to stress your defenses, right? You don't have those escape routes. You can't escape to TV or other places you might have been able to escape to at home. Even positive things. You know, we have to be careful, for example, in giving too much reading material to clients. Because if we do give too much reading material, even if it's a positive book, we might find that students or clients are escaping to that. You can't manipulate wilderness. I can remember still from visiting my son when he was in wilderness therapy, how frustrated I became. And I had been a wilderness therapist at this point for more than 10 years. How frustrated that I became that it was raining and it was getting in the way of our field experience. And I had to be reminded as a father that that was just what it is. I remember one day in a cold October fall where we had a freezing rain and we were sitting inside of my shelter, inside of our sleeping bags, doing therapy sessions, trying to have some sort of a fire to keep us warm, but the wood was wet and there was smoke all inside of the tent, so we were using our sleeping bags to stay warm. And then after one session, I turned to Steve, one of the staff, and I said, I'll give you 5 minutes to convince me not to have the rest of the sessions in my car. And he simply said to me, Brad, show the kids how to suffer. And so I was immediately relieved of the idea of having sessions in my car, because I thought, yes, this is the struggle. You can't control it. How do you cope with it? It gave my suffering that day meaning. And I think for the students, it gives them an opportunity to deal with things that are outside of their control. The rites of passage, the ceremonies that we have, the welcome ceremony, the transition ceremonies into various phases, the symbols that we use, all tend to cement and reinforce the growth throughout the program. There's a lot of critique of current day culture that we've lost the rites of passage. Wilderness therapy is itself a rite of passage, right? It's going out into the literal and metaphorical wilderness and wandering around to find oneself. So the reintroduction of rites of passage can powerfully reinforce the messages, the lessons that we're trying to teach. It's a wonderful opportunity for assessment. I always say, don't make a long-term decision in a short-term crisis. Wilderness therapy is a nice time to pause, to reassess, and to see where we need to go long-term. And because you have this microcosm, because you have this sterile environment, not physically sterile, but psychologically sterile, meaning that there's a lot of the noise and distractions removed. You're able to kind of see where the child is at, see where the young adult is at, see what they need, see what's working, see what's not working, see what they use as a resource, see what challenges them. The removal of the negative, I put in parentheses, unsupervised influences. Some parents are concerned that they're going to introduce their children into a group where there's a lot of delinquents or negative peers. And there is some of that sometimes. The difference between that and home is that it's supervised. I've had students that inadvertently got placed in the same group where they knew each other at home. And I would always try to talk the parents into give it some time. I mean, think about it. Ideally, and I think this will resonate with you, ideally, wouldn't we love to take your child and all of their peers into a program and treat the whole group, the whole system? See how they influence each other? See what they're trying to do to fit in with each other, to impress each other? See who's the follower, who's the leader? Right? And intervene with those dynamics? So, yes, there are kids that are struggling. Ideally, I always say, I would love it if your child would be at one point the most functional member of the group, and at another point, one of the least functional members of the group, to kind of see how they cope with that dynamic. See how they cope as a leader, when maybe they're the only ones committed to positive growth, behavior, and healing. And then to see when they're struggling, how they listen to and respond to peers. It's a vulnerable place. Even people that have some experience outdoors, and some of our clients and students do, there's a vulnerability to primitive living, nomadic living, right? Everything on your back, moving from place to place. There's something that exposes parts of you because you're outside of your comfort zone. And it becomes a metaphor for getting outside of your comfort zone psychologically. Learning interdependence. You know, I think about my own experience in residential treatment and how it didn't require the same kind of interdependence, trust, cooperation as does wilderness therapy, because you really do need everybody in the group functioning to be able to cook and clean and set up camp. Any member or combination of members not participating in the solution, in the work, in the day-to-day become highlighted. And then the conflict and the challenges, the communication becomes something that we work around with that. A lot of our clients and students will talk about developing a sort of empathy with their parents because they're dealing with kids that are struggling, that are not helping. And they want to move, they want to hike, they want to function, they want to have extra time to play games, to have treats, to sing songs and tell stories and talk about stories at night. But if everybody's not functioning together, it becomes incrementally more challenging. And then the futility of the old coping mechanisms. There's a behavioral concept in here, and there's also a wilderness concept in here. The behavioral concept is that when we intervene, that we're likely to see an increase in the negative behaviors. It's called extinction burst, right? When old behavior stops serving somebody, stops getting reinforced, we're likely to see an increase in that behavior before it extinguishes. And in wilderness, there's really nowhere to run. There are no walls. There's nowhere to go. And everything that you might try, because it's such a complete container, doesn't work, doesn't provide that escape. even the manipulation softens and is mitigated by the letter writing process. So the futility of the old coping mechanisms is an important aspect that makes wilderness therapy effective. It tends to do that. Even though the field experience is critical, right? We think it's unique. We think the staff shifts, the 8-day staff shifts are unique. We think that the container is unique. We think the experiential component is unique. We recognize that there are a lot of things going on that contribute to the change and the maintenance of that change. And first of all, you're disrupting the old system. That's good in and of itself. Professors in college would teach me about just disrupt the system. Any change is good. Stop the old way of interacting and see what resources come up to change the system. Amplification, right? You really do put a microscope on the issues, on the client, on their strengths, on their struggles, on their pain, on their healing. The process is slowed down. Parents, when they come out, will often talk about, excuse me, they'll talk about their experience just being out there for a day and the emotional, spiritual, psychological impact that has on them. Natural and logical consequences, less contrived. You know, if something happens that we just need to clean it up, or somebody's not cleaning up camp, or somebody left something back at camp that's important, or people aren't working to cook dinner, all of those things become natural consequences. And the logical consequences are quite easy also, because it's a group setting that requires everybody's cooperation. So it's a great opportunity to practice those natural and logical consequences, which we know to be more effective than the contrived ones. Internal versus external locus of control, I talked about that. You know, the shift from what happens to me, the facticity is what philosophers say. The facticity of our life is what has the biggest impact on us, versus my choices have the biggest impact to determine my happiness, my fulfillment, the richness of my life. They're captive audiences without walls. And there is a leverage in wilderness therapy that we try not to overuse, but is inherent. They want to get back to the front country. They want to get back to what they call real life. Even though I make the argument sometimes that camping outdoors is not fake life. It might be more real than living in a home with fluorescent lights and temperature control. So there's something about it that if they don't work, they don't make progress, they don't graduate, becomes a motivator for them. I've told this story, I may have told it on Monday before we had to cancel the webinar, about a therapist of mine who came from residential back into wilderness after having left it. Brought a couple of students with him from residential. And one student who had battled and power struggled with him in sessions previously, during one of his initial wilderness therapy sessions back in the wilderness, the therapist stopped the session short, frustrated that they weren't getting anywhere, and just, you know what, I'm done, I'll just talk to you next week. And the young man said, no, don't leave, don't leave, don't leave. And the therapist sat back down with them. Wasn't trying to play that game, just so happened that way. And he said, and shared in clinical meeting, I still remember the evening that he shared it, he said, wilderness therapy makes us such better therapists. So the family work, something that Evoke brought into the industry that did not exist in any kind of large part at all. Primitive living is something we're still committed to, right? We're not adventure therapy. We're not recreational therapy. We're not a base camp model. We see the value in the challenge model, in the microcosm of primitive living. We see the value in it. We think that it has more impact, and the research shows that it does. Home therapy for you, and then for your child when they eventually come home. The wilderness therapist, of course. We believe in the value of an educational consultant, and in guiding and managing the case from beginning to end, so that they become that seamless professional, advocate, challenger, provocateur to the system. support to the system. The field staff cannot be underrated. Again, I'll say it again, 8-day shifts, 8 days, 24/7. You don't see that in any other kind of therapeutic setting that I know of. And that creates a kind of seamlessness, right? It's comprehensive. There aren't gaps in it. And the students and clients have to work through relationships instead of just waiting for the next shift to come. So what are the goals of wellness therapy, the purposes of wellness therapy? First of all, it's a wake-up call. Again, in my early days, that's what I thought it was almost completely, a wake-up call, a kick in the pants. In many ways, I will say still, it has that impact. You have their attention. And in some ways, it creates a new bottom, right? They find themselves in a situation that they didn't want to be in. It's aversive, it's challenging, it's uncomfortable. And you're saying, your choices led to this point. What are you going to do now? So that there's an alertness that gets created from this kind of intervention, a focus. You buy some time, right? Like I said, in a crisis, you don't want to make a long-term decision. Many residential treatment centers are much longer than 90 days, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 16 months. And so wellness therapy allows you to intervene in a crisis to get things safe and stable, and then to see through assessment and the treatment progress where the next step is. The therapeutic benefit, I think that this is under-reported sometimes. I think it's undervalued sometimes. Wellness therapy, I have, no matter where clients are in terms of their growth, they'll talk about the experience in wellness being memorable, being powerful and significant. Some hold on to resentment, but by and large, the majority will talk about it being one of the most growth-producing parts of their life. Even the ones that are still angry about it might say that. I've had tragic experiences with students. In fact, I had one just recently with a former student of mine from 10 years ago. And his mother said to me, when she shared the news with me, she said he still talked about wellness as being one of the most wonderful times in his life. The evaluative feedback, like I said, the assessment, providing you both natural observation, which is very important. That's what the therapist observes, as well as the testing that can occur and the feedback from staff and from peers. This also helps determine what the next appropriate step is. Establishing family therapy. I think, when I wrote this slide, which was many years ago, it didn't have the meaning that it does today. I think that wellness therapy does a great job. You folks on this broadcast tonight that are on it live are a testament to that, that we get you into the kind of sweetness of the work, right? You get a taste for it. You see how it benefits your life. And there's something about wellness that creates a readiness, not just for the client and the student, but also for the parent. And we take that opportunity to invite you into the work. So we establish that jumping off point, that springboard for family therapy, family work. We prepare for the next step. I talk about the stages of resignation to acceptance to even investment in the process. That changes the level of care that a child can be successful in, right? He or she can have lower levels of care, lower levels of supervision and structure because they're more motivated than if they had just gone straight into a therapeutic school or residential treatment center. It's this softening effect we talk about. Because it's such a wonderful container, we can take kids that are threatening themselves, threatening others, struggling, dysregulated, really having a difficult time managing their behavior, their emotions, and in various sorts, and we can deal with them because of the supervision ratios, because of the container, because there's nowhere to go, because of the slowness and deliberateness of the process, and things tend to soften over time, right? The tantrum tends to, the behavior tends to, the struggle tends to soften over time. It changes levels of care for aftercare, like I said. And so some students will say, can't I go now? You have your assessment. I've been here 2 weeks. You know who I am. Send me to residential. I'd like to get back to a hot shower and 3 hot meals a day that are served to me by the cafeteria. And then part of what we say is, well, we'll see. We'll see where you're at when it's time to go. Socialization skills, especially with our autism students, but it goes for all of them. Learning to socialize in healthy ways in various contexts, in various situations. And like I said, the assessment is important. For our family program, this is something we've developed over the years in conjunction with feedback from family and from our own observation and experience. Mentors. This was suggested by a parent years ago. Mentors for the early program. I would argue, for those of you that aren't new, that mentors are important in all of our lives. Right? It's important for all of us that we not be the most capable person in the room all of the time. So a mentor might come in the way of a therapist, of a sponsor, of people that are farther down the road than us. Mentors are important. We provide those to new families. A family coordinator to make sure that your daily questions get answered. Those questions that don't need to go to the therapist can be addressed by the mentor, right? How do I deal with medication? How do I send them new glasses? What do I send them for the holidays? Those kinds of questions. The parent portal. There's a few things about the parent portal that I think are really cool. First of all, it's interactive. You check off the boxes. The therapist can see if you're keeping up. There's reading assignments, writing assignments. There's webinar, podcast assignments. There's groups that we ask you and invite you to attend. There's workshops that we invite you to come to. Visits also. You know, I put on here questions. My idea when we created the parent portal was have the client, the parent, ask the therapist questions like, how about a phone call? When is that going to happen and why not? Or why? What's the length of stay? How do you decide that? Is my child ready for a visit? Should I be scheduling one? Why or why not? Because I want you to understand the intention behind it. It's kind of assure that you're getting intentional treatment as a parent, as a family. Of course, weekly parent phone calls with the parents. Make sure you ask for what you need. How does this apply to you that aren't new to the program? If you have a therapist, talk to your therapist about what you need at home. Even those of you who've been, because some of you I see on here haven't been in our program for years. It's okay to ask professionals for what you want, what you need out of sessions. But ask your therapist what you want. Because if you don't ask, we're going to go with our kind of template and it may or may not match your needs. The webinars, ideally, that we do, I try to do them twice a week, as is the case with this week. It was not possible. You provided pictures of your students, media sometimes of your students, your children. We were the first Willness therapy program in the country that I know of to have in-field phone calls using satellite phone, cell phone technology. Because we believe we are family therapists. We were founded by family therapists. We saw the family as critical to healing and maintaining change. So we still do that, of course. Some programs still do not do that. Mid-program visits was also something that we pioneered. Was uncommon, rare, really, exceptional. But finding an opportunity where it's clinically valuable, and that's different for each individual family and child. Sometimes it's a reward, sometimes it's a challenge, sometimes it's an opportunity to set a boundary, sometimes it's to reconnect or do some old work. There could be a host of reasons why a mid-program visit would be appropriate, and a host of reasons why it would be inappropriate. Workshops and support groups. We try to do support groups in some of our major hubs. We invite every family, if they possibly can, to come out to one workshop. You can combine that with an in-field visit with your child if it's appropriate timing and at the right program. So workshops are important. Multi-family experiential educational groups. Online journals and letters, right? You know about those. And then we've added intensives and pursuits. I can't say this more emphatically for the intensives. If there's anything you want to do, in my opinion, that will contribute to the health of your family, I can't think of anything more than attending one of our intensives or one like it at another program. Pursuits or programs for families. If they want to do some outdoor family fun, light therapy, very light therapy, sober fun for young adults, but those intensives can be really powerful. And come to one as an individual. Consider that, even instead of doing it as a family. My own experience in my own therapy, what I do in individual therapy in my own individual work is as important to my role as a father and a husband of anything I do in family therapy. And I do some family therapy, and I've done some couples therapy, but most of my work is individual because it's about me. And it doesn't matter if my wife or child have a legitimate, tangible issue or problem. That's irrelevant. It's how am I in relationship to that. I have a slide that I've posted here for those of you watching that describes a typical day. An 8 a.m. wake up, a mindfulness activity in the morning, breakfast, a morning group, a hike, lunch, personal time. Each day we want time for fun if we can, time for written and reading assignments, letters home, maybe some hiking in the afternoon. You arrive at camp, you set up camp, create a fire, create the cooking and eating area and the sleeping area. Those two should be apart from each other. Group therapy in the evening, that's kind of our most powerful experience of the day that centers around that group therapy experience at night. And then if there's enough time, there's games, songs, stories at night. In addition to the standard day, they'll have standing groups. Standing groups are groups that anybody can call at any moment. They last between 2 and 10 minutes to solve a problem, to express something, to check in, to problem solve, to give feedback. Individual sessions when the therapists come out. Also, the staff are asked to have individual sessions with the specific students that they're assigned to. Layovers, we try to have 2 to 3 layovers a week to make sure that laundry, food resupply, written assignments, sitting in therapy. In the early days, we tried to do therapy while we hiked, but it became very difficult to concentrate and to follow up on unwritten assignments and letters. Laundry happens during layovers. Showers, twice a week. We ask them to take showers. Of course, getting food each week. They get fresh fruit and vegetables each day, fresh water every day, and they get resupply a couple of times a week of the bulk of their food. Personal time, P time, sometimes it's called, where they can work on any of their assignments. They can work on art. They can read. Hard skills are camping, hiking, packing a pack, building a shelter, building a fire, making crafts. Soft skills are communication, what kind of language you're using, cooperating with the group, working with the group, kind of the more verbal, oral, kind of therapy, traditional therapy activities, assignments that you have. Academic work, we want them to have some academic work, just for the discipline of it, just for the practice of it. It would be silly when the most common complaint on an application is school problems. It would be silly for a program not to have any academic work and then to pat themselves on the back for the work that they're doing with kids. So having some reading and writing assignments, having some academic work is critical, we think. Chores, that's a part of family living, right? It's a part of being in a small society. I used to say that our Willness therapy group is like the universe, only it's reduced down to a size that we can observe it very clearly. And everything becomes grist for the mill. And the appreciation for nature and what it adds is very important. I've shared this model. This model actually is in my book. It's in some videos I've done talking about the theory of wilderness therapy. I've not heard it from anybody else, but I learned about it in school years before I was introduced to wilderness therapy, and I think it's a fantastic application. Abraham Maslow has a sociological theory that says that human beings must first work on safety and physical. His idea was, if your safety or your physical is at risk or threatened or not stable, you can't possibly work on higher level needs like what it means to belong and who I am, my identity. That was his idea. what we've learned in our experience, it's in the context of the struggle that we learn what it means to belong to a group, that we learn what it means to be a self, that idea of efficacy earlier. So wilderness therapy becomes not an interruption to life, but really an intensified version of life. When studying primitive cultures, we see that the lessons, the values, the meaning of the tribe, the meaning of being an individual are all woven together inside of their songs, their stories, their legends, their oral tradition, their practices, their religion, their daily life. In our culture, those are very separated, very contrived, right? We get money out of an ATM machine. Our father or mother might be an accountant, right? They might sell ad space on television. And it's hard for our children to get the sense of what you sow is what you reap is what you sow, right? Whereas if you work on a farm, that's fairly obvious. You don't wake up and milk the cows, things go badly for the cows and for the farm. And so wilderness therapy reduces everything to its most simple nature. And in that, we learn what it means to be a self. One of the early pioneers of wilderness therapy is quoted to say, and this comes from 3 decades or more ago, and it's quoted by Will White. Whenever we adopted what we have come to call contrived experiences, the overall impact diminished for the participants. There was something valuable about the experience. When I've had outpatient therapists, especially those who work with families that don't have a lot of resources, say, what's the application, right? What's the application from this model that you have to everyday life? Forgive the metaphor, but it's kind of like, you know, the race cars that they have on the racing circuit, right? Really fancy, expensive, multi-$100,000 race cars. That technology informs the production line of cars that we all are driving in, right? They take that wisdom, that research, that innovation, and they bring it back to the car that you and I have in our driveway. Same with wilderness therapy, any kind of cutting-edge, progressive approach to something. The lesson is, it's in the experience. If we slow down enough, we can see the opportunities for teaching for growth. I learned many years ago, I talk about this in my book, about grocery shopping being an opportunity to have short conversations, to have children help. I call it the grocery store lecture, where I can say something and then ask somebody to go get the milk. It doesn't go on for hours. It creates a natural break. They're walking on the other end of the grocery store to get milk. They have time to think about the 1 or 2 sentences I just offered. And then when they come back, they'll have something to say. Taking a walk outside. Recognizing that this is not a life of destinations, but it's the life of a journey, right? It's the journey. That's the idea. I think that's some of the take-homes. I have some pictures and basic ideas for those of you that are watching. The use of experiential metaphor, right? These are children crossing a stream, having to work together. To cross a stream, the cooperation, the patience, the fun. I mean, fun is an important part of life, and they learn to have fun. I joke with my own children. My 10-year-old will say, "Dad, I'm bored," and I'll joke and say, "Go play with sticks and rocks." Right? We've just moved into a new house. Our backyard is unfinished. It's mostly sticks and rocks. And just the other day, some friends were when they were actually playing with sticks and rocks. These kids in the wilderness learn to play with sticks and rocks, literally. And they have fun. Innocent, wholesome fun with people that they wouldn't have chosen to play with before. And they learn what it's like to have fun in a very basic, simple way. Differentiation and distance. I know one of the complaints from new parents about wilderness therapy is the distance, the separation. I will simply say it is a part of creating individual self-worth, self-identity for all family members, so that eventually they can come back together and be connected. In American culture, we don't do a great job of spending time alone. We think that the way to develop a sense of oneself is in relationship. There is a tremendous amount of value, research and theory that says that spending time alone, quietly, outside of the context of our favorite other, creates opportunities for self-growth, for self-identity, for self-discovery. So that's what it's for. It's the first step in the process. I've never seen family therapy more effective than letter writing therapy because how much it slows it down. Parents will say for years that the letter writing therapy was so powerful for them. You have time to reflect. You have time to digest. You're not reacting in the moment. I always say to parents, when I got a letter, the next day, I turn in letters on a Wednesday night, let's say, and I get an 8-page letter the next day, almost never is that letter a good letter to send back to the child. Let's talk about it. Let's digest. Let's take a deep breath. Right? You're really learning to become differentiated, to have a healthy relationship, an intimate, healthy relationship. But part of that differentiation, part of what I'm describing, is healthy attachment, non-reactivity, non-enmeshment, non-fusion. So letter writing therapy slows everything down for everybody. And it provides a wonderful opportunity for coaching. I work on letters with clients all the time that may or may not send them to professionals, to their children, to each other all the time that aren't in Willness therapy because of how valuable it can be to slow it down, to put it in black and white. I'll say to people sometimes, you know, change the words just a little bit and see how that feels. And it changes everything. There's a cultural difference and immersion in Willness therapy, right? Pulling a child out of traditional American, typically, sometimes Canadian or foreign culture, and bringing them into this culture, but teaching them the same core values is very valuable. How many of you know a second language? And because of your education in the second language, know English so much better? It's a similar idea to pulling somebody out of a culture, putting them into a new culture, and teaching them the same lessons. They learn so powerfully, those lessons. They're more open to them because they don't come dressed in the clothes of their parents, of the authority figures in their life. The idea of ritual and ceremony. I have a picture for those of you watching of a young woman who has to sit in her spot, her ceremonial spot, after her transition to airface because she wanted to meditate. And it just shows the beauty of the experience. Has the north, south, west, and east gates here in the picture with her sitting in the center. Why Evoke specifically? We've done more research than any Willness program in the country. That's not disputable. We've done it for longer. We have several long-term studies, several publications. The clinical sophistication, by the way, our research shows, on average, that we are 30% more effective. The reports are 30% more positive. We have 30% better results than the industry average. So it's not just that we do research. We've been doing it longer than everybody else. It's becoming hot in the last 5 or 10 years, but we've been doing it longer than that. Clinical sophistication. We have a mind, body, spirit curriculum, right? You're taking advantage of the new understanding of how meditation, yoga, various forms of mindfulness can help with anxiety, depression, mood, substance abuse disorder. Individual treatment planning and length of stay was new when we started, and we continue to innovate. Our safety record is impeccable. The group niche, right? Find a group that fits. The wonderful thing about Willness therapy that you can't get in some other interventions is the opportunity to be in a group that fits you, because you go into a larger population. So these small groups, there could be a great group niche. The owners are involved in Evoke. And the compassion. This is not a behavioral or punitive model. I was talking to a family that was admitting just this week. In fact, I think they're admitting tomorrow. And I was describing the difference between the previous setting that they had their son in and the challenges and the unhappiness that he had with it. I said, it still may be challenging here, but one thing you're going to feel and see differently is the compassionate approach of the staff and the therapist and the compassion toward you all that you deserve. Family support, right? Unsurpassed in terms of what we try to offer you all. We have a company culture of organizational health, right? I'm taking a sabbatical in June for 6 weeks. I'll be replacing one of the therapists when I come back in the fall, going out to the field for 8 or 10 weeks so that they can have their sabbatical. We send therapists to self-improvement seminars. We host professional retreats for men and women and have our therapists come to it so that they can do their own work. We have supervision where we talk about how the therapist is dealing with the burden of holding on to the pain and the trauma that their clients bring to them. We believe in organizational health. It's something you don't see, but it shows up in a better quality of program. It's one of the reasons why we've been rated several years in a row one of the best places to work in Outside Magazine. And innovative, willing to try new things, willing to do something different. All right, I'm happy to take any live questions that have come up. First question. Our son, who just turned 20, really struggles with his experience in Willness when he was 17 and transported to Oregon. He is processing it with EMDR and therapy right now. Even with all that, as the parents, we know that that was a powerful and life-changing event in his life and the lives of his parents, of us as his parent. He has been in treatment since then 3 times. Just wanted to share that for us as parents, Willness was the turning point for him with all the trauma and continuing drug usage. He is now sober 5 months. Thank you for sharing that. It's a complex issue, isn't it? It's not simple. It's something that we all have a different relationship with. And if your child feels angry about it, giving them the space to process it is important. I forgot to talk about the take-home messages from tonight. Not making a short-term decision in a crisis, right? It's a nice place to stabilize and interrupt a crisis. It's an opportunity for assessment intervention. We use experiential therapy, the Willness experience as the foundation, but all the traditional therapies as an overlay. So they're getting the same therapies they would in a clinic, in a hospital, in a treatment center, in a therapeutic school, in outpatient therapy, but you have that experiential foundation, that delivery method. It's dynamic, powerful, and memorable, and it's an effective intervention for family therapy, right? It creates space for the family work. All right, folks. We would like all families to attend 6 12-step support groups. So we invite you all to do that. If you're new to this, we want you to go at some point during 6 meetings, any combination of your liking, Al-Anon or CODA or familiesanonymous.org. You can go to those sites and find meetings in your areas. You can also go to NAMI.org. I'm more and more aware of this, and some of you will might get a giggle out of this because a lot of you have done your own work. I have realized now, and I'm very clear about it, that when people say that they don't need therapy, that they don't have a problem, they have a well-defended reason why they don't need to go to a 12-step meeting, I've realized what it is. People are just scared. I don't say that to be disrespectful. I'm just calling it what it is. For those of you who have stepped into these meetings, who have stepped into the family therapy room, who have done your own work, who have come to an intensive, it's scary. And so for those of you who have, that's the heroic step, right? That's the heroic journey, is stepping into it. We would like we invite all of you to look at our social media platforms and opportunities. All of these broadcasts are available on the podcast app on your iPhone. Just you can find that on your iPhone or iOS device on the podcast app. On Android, it's on the SoundCloud app. Download the SoundCloud app, or you can go to a computer, go to SoundCloud.com. On all 3 of those platforms, search Evoke Therapy Programs. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Evoke Therapy. On Facebook, search Evoke Therapy Programs. You can find the Evoke Family Therapy Foundation on Facebook if you want to be a part of an organization that helps people that can't afford therapy give back, serve there. Go to our Evoke Therapy blog for current content. My book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, is available on Amazon, or you can also listen to it on Audible or through a CD purchase. The next intensive, we have 1 or 2 spots available for the next intensive still, June 6th through 10th. So if you want to step into some work that's incredibly powerful, life-changing, I invite you to come to Finding You. The next one is June 6th through 10th. The following one is June 18th through 22nd. We are doing a Finding You 2, October 10th through 14th. That requires that you've already been to a Finding You. I'll be running that one. And in coming soon, we're going to have an alumni intensive. Anybody 18 years and older who wants to come to our Park City Evoke Summit Lodge and do an intensive, you have to have been a client or a student at Evoke, a young person, and we're going to do an intensive for them, which I'm really excited about running that. You can also do a private family intensive for those of you who would like that. Contact intensives@evoketherapy.com for more information. If you are a professional in the therapy field, anywhere in the therapy field, you're interested in attending one of our professional workshops, growth workshops, similar to Finding You, but focused for professionals who are in the field. The next one is Wednesday, September 9th through 11th. The men's one is June 10th through 12th. We have 1 spot available there. That's coming up. I'm going on sabbatical. I'm going to try to get our therapists out there to be visiting the various spots. So the only one we have on the calendar for parent support groups right now is New York City, June 4th. And I know some of our therapists are eager to get out there and to visit you in the field, if you will. And that's Monday, June 4th, 7 to 9 p.m. That's at City University of New York in Midtown. That will be my last parent support group before my sabbatical. If you possibly can, we ask all current families to come to a workshop. And the next one is June 23rd through 24th. Pursuit trips, like I mentioned earlier, for families or for Sober Fun. Happy to answer any questions. Before I close, question: how do I know if I'm unhealthy in my disconnection or healthy differentiated as I continue to do my work and think about him nearly as often as I did? I'll try to read that again, just so I can get it perfectly right, the question. How do I know if I am unhealthy in my disconnection or healthy differentiated as I continue to do my work and think about him nearly as often as I did? I think I understand the question. It's a hard one to answer because you kind of know when you know. What I love about your question is when you're in a new kind of relationship with your child, it's going to feel foreign. It's going to feel wrong. I tell parents who are enmeshed, who are struggling with a lack of differentiation, when you have healthy boundaries, it's going to feel to you like abandonment. And they might even say you're abandoning them because you're used to the kind of this ping pong back and forth, right? This very quick exchange, very reactive exchange, very jump in quick exchange. So it's going to feel distant. So the answer to the question is you kind of find yourself through the process first, and that allows you to withstand the feelings, the mother tongue, as analysts might say, right? Your child of origin message about how close you're supposed to be to somebody and what that looks like. It's going to feel foreign, so you'll be able to talk yourself through that. But in my experience, it takes a lot of work in therapy. It's not something that can be easily discussed, even theoretically. It's something you talk about through with your therapist. All right. Thank you for joining us tonight. I hope that those of you that are new, welcome to the program. Feel free to share this broadcast with any of your friends and family if you would like them to have greater understanding. The next broadcast will be, it won't be this Wednesday because this is based on an old slide. It'll be next, I believe it'll be next Wednesday. Next Wednesday, May 30th, and it'll be the cause and effect thinking error in parenting. One of the chapters from my book, actually. That became one of the chapters of my book. Look forward to that. Folks, thanks for joining us. For and on behalf of your children, thank you for putting in the effort. This is not easy work to step into, and no matter what your friends, associates say about the unnecessary aspect of therapy, most of them are just afraid to look at the stuff that you all are looking at. So I just want to thank you for that and acknowledge that. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.